Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching the John Woodard Show. We have the distinct honor of interviewing Dan Bishop, Congressman from the North Carolina's 9th Congressional District, who was part of an attempt by the Democrats to change the minds of the electorate in the last election. 2 years ago?
No, just 11 months.
11 months ago.
Yeah.
Wow, time flies.
Time flies.
So now we're having an opportunity to talk to him about where he's been and what he's been finding out. And Dan, thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
It's a pleasure to meet with you.
Likewise. Glad to see you. Thank you for coming and giving me the opportunity.
What committees have you been assigned to?
So I'm on the Committee on Homeland Security and on the Small Business Committee. And they were, so entering Congress in the midterm, I know that you've interviewed my friend Greg Murphy down in the eastern part of the state, and Greg is in the 3rd district, I'm in the 9th, and we both ran in the same special election cycle for different reasons. Walter Jones had passed away. But in my case, in the 9th district, the general election had been won by Mark Harris as a Republican nominee, and then there were allegations of mail-in ballot, absentee ballot,
harvesting.
Yeah, misconduct. It was frankly relatively modest the scope of it that was alleged, and I think there was sort of an unfair campaign to destroy Mark Harris, but nonetheless, he agreed in due course that we should have a special election, and then he was not a candidate, and I decided after some discussion with my wife Jo to step forward into that race, and we were able to win it, which I thought was important. But as you say, it was. Democrats were going all out. Dan McCready was my opponent. We said I was the right Dan and he was the wrong Dan, and there's a little double entendre there, but that kind of caught fire. And the Democrats, this massive funding operation, Democrat, they always seem to be flush with cash, and sometimes it's hard to understand why they seem to have that advantage. But they certainly they can concentrate it anywhere at any time. They use this Act Blue network you've heard about. And so for much of that campaign, he was outspending me 5-1. But in the end, the White House, the NRCC, all the pieces of the Republican constellation sort of came together. We had the 2nd most expensive special election campaign in history, in congressional history, and we won that special election last September.
That had to create a serious, you would think it would cause a serious reckoning on their part to put so much effort into taint the election that would cause voters to either stay home or to vote for the Democrat candidate. And although you did win, you didn't win by a whole lot.
That's right.
Because of the relentless negative publicity that came out of that event. But now you've been in Washington for 11 months. What's the biggest surprise that you have encountered, and what's been your biggest challenge trying to get your feet on the ground and find out who's on first?
Well, John, it has been, I'd say it's probably been the most extraordinary first 11 months in Congress you could imagine. We walked in the door, and I'm going to link it up to something you just said a minute ago in a second, but walked in the door, and within a week or so, we had the revelation of the president's perfect telephone call with the president of the Ukraine, and thereupon began the latest scam hoax that the Democrats have pursued in a sequential sort of way, with the starting with the Russia thing, and of course this was the Ukraine hoax that turned into their scam or sham impeachment. So we went straight through that from the time we walked in the door, and as the Senate was finishing its focus on that, with the coronavirus pandemic was there, and So in the ensuing time, Speaker Pelosi has had us in recess most of the time. I believe that members of Congress should be in Congress. I think we should be in Washington serving people's interests. But the buildings are more or less closed down. The public is not admitted. It's very eerie. It's a little desolate in Washington, and I think we need to get back to a sense of normalcy as soon as we can. But so that's been the thing. But you said a minute ago you would think the Democrats would have learned from their effort and the outcome in my race, that people are not drawn to the approach that they've taken, but they've doubled down. We've now had 6 special elections. There's one special election that has occurred right before, and then the two that I had and Greg Murphy, and the others that have occurred. Total of 6. There's one more that was that we didn't really compete in, Elijah Cummings' seat in Maryland, which is not a get, for no way to win that. But in every one of the other ones, we've won. Every single one, including Mike Garcia in a district in California that was held by Katie Hill until she resigned following a fairly lurid sexual scandal. But Mike Garcia won in ballot harvesting. Ballot harvesting there is institutionalized. They're indignant about it happening in North Carolina in any slight respect, but they've built their entire election scheme around it in Democrat-heavy California. But notwithstanding that, Mike Garcia, who is a conservative, won that race by 10 points after me. So the Democrats are doubling down, and they continue on the same approach. But I don't believe it's going to lead to success for Democrats at all.
Well, the latest scandal is the post office issue, which is by all descriptions a made-up crisis. I personally don't think that we should have mail-in ballots. I'm certainly in favor of absentee ballots.
Sure.
But those are regulated, and you know who's getting them, and
Yep.
you know when you get it back.
Right.
You get all those controls. But anytime the Democrats want something so bad, you know it's something that's not good for you.
That's right. That's certainly true. And so we went. Speaker Pelosi, after having the House in recess for extensive periods, even though we certainly have some additional matters we need to attend to legislatively as the coronavirus pandemic continues. But she called us back to Washington last Saturday for an emergency session for this hysteria they whipped up over the Postal Service, which is maybe the most absurd thing that I've seen. And I've been paying attention to public policy for a while. I've been state legislator for a number of years and did a little local office way back in the mid-2000s. So I've been paying attention for a while. I can't think of one that's dumber than what they've whipped up, the hysteria they've whipped up over the Postal Service. And it really, the Postal Service doesn't operate like a juggernaut by any means. It's not a smooth operating thing. It's a massive $71 billion revenue organization. It's beset with a lot of problems, needs to be fixed. There have been a lot of bipartisan proposals to fix it over time. But the notion that somehow the Postal Service is being ripped apart before their eyes by the Trump administration in the last 2 months is just insane. Louis DeJoy, who is a North Carolinian, comes from Greensboro. He's been a stalwart Republican, by the way. But before he was ever a Republican activist, he was a logistics business CEO. It was a tremendous business by all reports. He understands this as well as anybody in the country. And the president made a good appointment. Well, let me correct myself. The Board of Governors, the independent Board of Governors of the Postal Service, appointed Louis DeJoy, and he was going in and beginning to implement reform and improvement practices that or plans that had been long since laid out by during the time of the Obama appointed or the Obama era Postmaster General. So just ordinary course of business, and you saw these extraordinary tales on the news of the blue collection boxes being taken on flatbed trucks so that people couldn't get their. But then you learn that some 12,000, I think, was a figure I heard during boxes had been taken up or moved during the Obama years of 2011 to 16, and it was that was absurd. The sorting machines being taken down, that was a normal, ordinary course process. There was nothing new, and the Postal Service was not falling apart. It had $14 billion of cash on hand. It had a $10 billion line of credit available to it under the CARES Act if it became necessary. Postal Service is just fine. But your point, what it is really about, is a Democrat scheme again. They want to, think about this. You never get any critical analysis by media. They talk about, the new wave is let's go to mail-in votes. Let's do, and because of coronavirus in particular, but you understand this was happening. Some states do it that way, but the mail's been around a long time, John. It's been around since the beginning of the country, as they're often pointing out to us. Some people say the post office is mandated in the Constitution. That's not right, but it is. The power is specifically set forth in the Constitution, and it pre-existed the Constitution. But the nation has never seen fit to conduct our election entirely by mail-in ballot for very good reasons, as the president has pointed out. And the media tries to, it's amazing how they have this almost unanimous attempt to blur the distinction that you just made in your question. But there's a whole different world between a registered voter sending an application for a ballot, getting the ballot coming to them in response to that application with their registration all set forth, completing the ballot, closing the envelope, signing it, having a witness sign and provide their address and return that to the Board of Elections. That's a whole different animal than just mass mailing out ballots to everybody on the voter roll. And then, you have no way to know who's getting them, returning them, whether there are imposter or fraudulent counterfeit ballots coming in from other sources, whether they be domestic or even foreign. It's a whole other thing. And President Trump has explained that a lot. It is common sense, but you keep on seeing these, every news outlet, all the leftist news fixtures will say, the president has said this is a right for fraud, or has said without evidence that this is right for fraud. Well, there is evidence. You can cite any number of cases. There's one in New Jersey. There's one in New York. There are others that don't come to mind. You can probably do. But it's
the race up in New York. Was,
absolutely.
It was that took them 6 weeks
right.
to declare that Maloney was the winner. And if I was one of the opponents, I'd be screaming bloody murder.
Sure.
Where's the evidence that she won?
Absolutely. And that's exactly the point. Even beyond the very ripe situation to take advantage and commit fraud, and again, even if you don't have evidence, it's common sense that exists. You have this question of public confidence in the outcome of the election. And if you set up a situation where the result necessarily dribbles in way past the deadline, then you're going to have litigation over whether you got to accept those votes, and it could go all the way to the United States Supreme Court. It is a disastrously stupid idea, and yet the Democrats love to game that kind of idea. They don't want to have, they always accuse the right of voter suppression, but the reality of it is Democrats want to find numbers that they can, even if they're dead people, whatever, they got names and they can kind of get some semblance of a voter out there they can append the vote to. Then they want to get in a situation where they can dominate or control how that voter casts the vote. They are all about that. And the mail-in ballot scheming is very much down that path. You talked about in the 9th District election that failed, the one that preceded my election. That's what the ballot harvesting, that's what it's about, frankly. And Democrats have done it aggressively in North Carolina for years. They did it in McCrory's election in 2016. And what it is, they go to people who applied, used to be public record, who has applied for an absentee ballot, and then the partisans would go out and visit that person's home, and if they're elderly or frail, and they'd offer to help them fill out their ballot and would do the witnessing for them, and the problem is you can't police that. It's not like the security of a polling site where people can go in and they're going to be left alone, and the election staff is going to see to it that happens. They're going to be manipulated. It's the risk of undue influence that makes that a bad thing. And boy, if you put a ballot out there for every single registered voter, even if they're ones that hadn't voted in 10 years, you're gonna see a nightmare of that kind of activity.
Well, it's clear that they are setting up the means to discredit the president's victory if, in fact, he does win, and create another Russia that they can either discredit him altogether or get some ballots reinstated for approval that would push him over the top, or push them over the top.
Yeah.
So it's quite a scheme that people ought to be really scared of. I was watching TV one day, and of all people, Jerry Nadler, somebody had videotaped him saying that ballot by mail was ripe
For fraud. Right. That's an old video. And that's right. That's what he believed when it was suited his convenience, right?
That's right.
And,
but I don't see anybody. I mean, Jim Jordan is a great guy, but I don't know where he's not brought that up. I don't know anybody that has.
Well, the president's spoken to it. You know that. You mean about mail-in ballots?
The Jerry Nadler quote.
Oh. Well, I've seen it circulate, and so I think it's out there. Jerry, you can't think about a lot of Democrats, and Jerry may be the best example. Is they're impossible to embarrass. They don't worry much about.
He's in a safe district, and
yeah.
So he doesn't care. He's going to do what he wants to do. And there's he knows that his voters are not going to get angry at him.
That's right. They'll put up with anything. They really will. That's the situation. And people, I think it comes to it sort of presents the question of the significance of the time that we're in. I think a lot of people have an instinctive recognition that this country's at an inflection point, that this election is more important than any others I've seen or participated in.
Everybody seems to. That's a universally held position on the part of most people. They realize how significant it is, and
right.
It's going to have a hell of a lot to do with how we govern ourselves for a long period of time if it goes the wrong way.
I think that's right, John, and I think that's what we need. There are many things to fear and worry about, and I hear people who are fearful about whether it's the manipulating balloting, or it's the coronavirus pandemic, and how certain officials are using it kind of as an excuse to make law on one man at a time, the governor, or they're looking at the rioting and the looting, burning in places. I mean, there's much to be concerned about, but I think things are moving in the right direction, John. I think that the American people are summoning themselves to speak clearly, and I think that we need an election result that is clear and unambiguous, and I think it will help resolve things. Some have thought that may lead us into more quagmire, more difficulty, more confrontation. I think the opposite may be true. If
we have a massive and overwhelming victory on one side or the other, that takes out the middle, and you have a far less chance of prevailing when you challenge the results.
I think it's so. I think from that perspective, it is true. I also think if the president and wins, and I think if Republicans, I think there's a shot at retaking control of the House of Representatives. I think the Senate should hold. I think we've got good prospects in many of the ballot positions in the state for Republicans to win. I think that a clear margin not only eliminates some of the argumentation over this, the kind of Democrat skullduggery about the election and trying to discredit the result. I think it also sends signals that will be heard. I think media, they're ultimately commercial folks, they will see that they're, as President Trump calls it, the DNC media, that being the handmaidens of the left is not a viable commercial course for them. And I think you will see, even this sort of out of control anarchist riotous behavior in the cities. Those are Democrat shock troops. Those people, it is an aligned political movement. Believe you me.
Oh yes, sir. Nobody talks about where the money's coming from, but everybody knows where the money's coming. There's not a single person in Congress or in the conservative media that will call out George Soros by name. I mean, he's not the only one.
Yep.
But they do say that Walmart, Apple, Twitter, and a variety of others give money to Antifa and Black Lives Matter, but the chief organizer and funder of these subversive efforts is George Soros.
Sure, absolutely. I don't mind calling
his
it
open
out.
Mind society, open mind society,
open society,
open.
Gosh, I'm forgetting it too. It's now you're throwing me off on that. What do they call it? Open? Isn't it open society? Or, no, that's not it either. Well, I'm not coming up with it either.
Yeah, I'm not coming up. But that's the point. So I don't. I talk to people all the time, and when I tell them George Soros, I'm really amazed that some people don't even know who the guy is. But nevertheless, what do you think is going to be the outcome of the riotous activities that we're seeing in all these cities?
John, I would say that when this began, remember. George Floyd was killed in about the last week of May, and so all the rioting that first of all, I think folks have good reason to want to see some accountability and justice for that particular event. I've never heard anybody really defend it. Maybe one or two people have raised questions, but I mean that didn't make a lot of sense to anybody how that was handled, and you understand people being upset. I think the thing in Kenosha, you can raise questions about what happened there, but protesting over something is not what we've seen. That's not protest. We're seeing it in city after city after city, and I would have thought from the beginning the American people would have had an immediate desire to see law and order prevail, and so I was expecting to see a move in support of the president. And polling at least didn't initially suggest that was happening. Now there's a lot you can say about polling, but what I think I have detected over the last 3-4 weeks is it is wearing thin. And for me, the turning point, in terms of what I think I'm seeing, is the Chicago looting that occurred, I think not this past Monday, but the Monday before. So it's roughly, getting on toward 2 weeks ago. It wasn't the first, and it was, but they went through the Miracle Mile, I think, the retail area, and they just destroyed every retail outlet there. And
telling people, you live in a black house, you get out of that house and let black person back in.
Yeah. I think it's wearing thin.
It is wearing thin.
And so then you've seen the response in Kenosha, and I've seen reports over the last day or so, armed, people are showing up on the other side, and there was one particularly shocking video on Twitter today of somebody who was fleeing from a crowd of people, but he was carrying a semi-automatic rifle. He fell, and they caught up with him. He shot 3 or 4 of them, I think. I mean, just seeing that on the streets of America is stunning. Maybe there's been, as this thing, I think I'm seeing this wave develop. There may have been, and there may still be, numbers of people out there who, although they're troubled by that, they think this is never going to happen in my neighborhood. But
they're mistaken.
It's coming. They've said it. They've shown it. As you mentioned the thing, and my wife Jo has been particularly transfixed by going out in a neighborhood. I think it was in Portland, and chanting. I won't chant what they chant because it's vulgar, but they're going to people who are quietly in their houses and shining lights in there. You just made reference to it, I think, and chanting essentially, wake up and then get out of that house. It's mine, and just this outlandish, crazy stuff. That movement is not about racial justice.
Hell no.
They've seized on something that's a deep wound in the American psyche over the history that's existed with slaves, beginning with slavery and the Jim Crow and so forth, and the generational, psychological sort of fixation we have with those things, even as we've corrected much of it and are on the way in this society to eliminating all vestige of it. But they seize on that in order to inculcate a Marxist regime which wants to destroy American institutions, American freedom, the whole concept of capitalism and the ability to have independence and provide for yourselves and to pursue happiness. That's what those fundamental ideas, the unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness set forth in that signal document, the Declaration of Independence, and followed through with the Constitution. That evil force, Marxism, wants to destroy it, and that's what they're about. And I don't think the American people are going to capitulate to it, but I think we are slow to anger as a country. I think a righteous anger is building, and I'm sensing that. Particularly the last couple of weeks with the party conventions, the Republican convention now underway as we're taping this, I think the contrast is astonishingly clear. And I do see movement out there in polls that are reported. I hear about other stuff, and I just think the energy is building.
That addresses the political consequences. I think that that's going to make for that massive and overwhelming victory that is going to solve the political side of the equation. But I have been afraid for quite some time that it was going to spark a civil war. And when A.G. Barr was giving congressional testimony 2-3 weeks ago, he made reference to, he said he was concerned that the violence that we were seeing would metastasize. Now, he didn't come out and say civil war, but I think that was clearly the inference of the words that he used. The question, therefore, is how are we going to be prepared for it? I did a podcast on that, and it's on the internet now, basically saying that if you think that it's going to be confined to a major metropolitan area where there's a high African American population, and that it's going to be, they're going to keep it there, you're mistaken, and telling people what they needed to do to be prepared for it and how to defend their families. I don't want to think the worst, but there's a significant, they didn't come this far to just say, "Oh well, the election's over," and that's it?
I think what you say is true. I think there's some answers to it, though. If the president is reelected cleanly, and particularly if we're able to maneuver in Congress without that much obstruction. Now, I don't think we'll have 60 votes in the Senate, but but if we're able to have both houses and the president's had an opportunity to settle into office and refine where he is, I think this devastation, this terrorizing sort of looting and rioting, even though it's widespread, it's appeared in multiple cities, it really is not, in terms of numbers, an insurrection that has military significance. The president, I believe, in the aftermath of a clarifying election, will take the steps that are necessary to restore order. And I think when the clampdown on that stuff comes in 2 or 3 cities, I believe it resolves itself. I'll tell you where I think you'd see a tremendous amount of it. If Joe Biden is elected president, you're going to see that persist, grow, and they're going to do it emboldened. And you talk about fear and devastation. That's what leads to the possibility of the kind of conflict I think you envision. Now, I don't want to be Pollyanna about it. I'm not suggesting that we've got an easy path forward in this country. We have a lot of corruption of our institutions, academia, media, Hollywood, the popular culture. It's a lot to deal with, and I have from time to time sounded sort of an ominous, fearful outlook and talking with somebody. I have a pastor here, a friend. In fact, he's got a lot of well-known fellow named David Chadwick. He does Moments of Hope. He's been a Presbyterian pastor here for many, many years, but you know, he pointed out there are in that silent majority that we know is out there, there are many, many very capable Americans, and the fact that they've been relatively quiet, and this has been a phenomenon that police forces with one hand tied behind their back have been left to contend with, does not mean that it is an unresolvable problem. Disorder of this magnitude and scale justifies the President of the United States using his powers to put down an insurrection. And the force that, I mean, actually the President said it. If you see it, he says, I just want these governors to ask me. I want them to ask me. I could do it so easy, he'll say. And it's one of the things, the Donald Trump way of expressing himself, that I don't know if I'd say it's so easy, but I do believe the awesome power of the presidency is equal to the task of stopping this. And so people shouldn't fear that it is an unsolvable situation. It is solvable. And I think the president's capable of solving it. And I'll be an advocate for him solving it. If this persists, we've had by the time we get an election result, if the election result is clear and we're moving into a new, we're done. As far as I'm concerned, we're done with the presidency being assaulted by the Russia special counsel scam. The deep state is deep, but the president has drawn it out into the open, and we're going to. And I know many of these men and women that are in Congress, but we're going to be supporting the president, and I think the president's prepared to take whatever action he has to take to save the country.
I just heard today that Adam Schiff has filed new subpoenas to get the records, some records that the Supreme Court had said that Congress was not entitled to, and he's taking another bite at that apple.
Yeah.
So he's keeping it alive.
Yeah.
But you've got to win a tremendous, massive, and overwhelming victory in order to not have them dilute the effort
Yep.
on the conservative side.
The American people have had, look historically, they've had an inclination to divide government, and I do think a divided government. It's again, if the president's strongly reelected, that does a lot on its own. I think it's necessary that we hold the Senate. It certainly is a goal of mine that we retake the House, but I think under the circumstances of a clear reelection success with the president holding the Senate, I think the Adam Schiffs of the world will be diminished. I think they'll continue to attempt to harass, but the dynamic that they've wrapped themselves around will have failed, and they can be carpers and critics and they can harass, but I don't believe it'll be quite the same, sense that they're getting ready to have a big, massive takeover type success. They're putting their cards on the table this election about that, and if they're not rewarded, I just think it becomes a decline, diminishing marginal returns. I'm sure they'll keep doing it, but the Ukraine thing, the American people never were particularly impressed by that. The amount of their effort that they put is a really intensive effort, and so what is the next thing? If it's Adam Schiff trying to, as you said, after the Supreme Court said they can't get the documents, well, the New York prosecutorial authorities have succeeded in the Supreme Court to get access to the president's tax returns. Finally, they want to embarrass him about it. So what? And I think I just think that's here's what I would say, John. I think some people that were listening to our conversation, or they're thinking that they're watching the news the way it goes, and it seems to be that they just start getting to the point they think it's just hopeless. Nothing's ever going to get right or fixed. And it's at that point when I would say, well, let's pause and think. The strengths of this country are extraordinary. It is still, in its core, the good people of America are who they are. We've always had serious problems to contend with from time to time. The coronavirus is such a thing. We're going to get through it. You look back in the Reagan years. I look back at Reagan years as launching 30 years of prosperity. I'm 56 years old at the time that came to pass. It set up an economy in which I could thrive for a lifetime. And we've had reversals of late, the Great Recession and then the coronavirus shutdowns and the impacts of that. So it's easy to forget that that Reagan was beset by the Iran-Contra scandal and the constant, just the Democrats were at his throat over foreign policy, and there was, and if you remember, just when he began, you had the nuclear freeze crowd who wanted to essentially have America unilaterally disarm, and all these outlandish things that did not come to pass, because heroes come when they're needed. That's the saying, and I think people, given the way our media has uniformly demonized the president, people aren't accustomed. Maybe some are, but some are not accustomed to thinking of Donald Trump in terms of hero. But I'm going to tell you that I'm not sure if a Donald Trump didn't exist in the world, I think we would have had to have created one for the unique circumstances that we're in right now. The way media has been destroyed by political agenda, the way academia and intellectualism and as I said before, the deep state, a bureaucratized Washington that's so massive that they've come to be certain, they've come to great certitude that it doesn't really matter, John, what you think or what I think or what anybody, the voters think, that the notion of the consent of the governed is a quaint anachronism to them. They don't believe in it. They think, whether they're going to even voice it to themselves or not, they believe that they're equipped to decide how American life should go and how the globe should be run, and they're going to run that in Washington. And they don't care what you think. So there's another saying out there that says, first they ignore you, and then they laugh at you, and then they fight you, and then you win. And I rather like that. I think that's very much captures Donald Trump's sort of personality and what he's about. Appears to be just a matter of time before they take him down too. You hear it, you get to begin to feel that way. But he persists, and he seems to be energized by it, and he's uniquely able to fight them. And I think that's why, long story, but that's why I'm where I am. That's why I ran in that special election that they were sure we were going to lose now that they had forced Mark Harris out of the race. They were sure they're going to flip the 9th district, and it's going to be part of the core of a strategy to essentially turn North Carolina blue through and through. Well, they didn't succeed because we stepped forward, and people were more resilient and Republican and on the right than they anticipated, and they got off their butts and they worked, and we won.
One of the big problems that we face going forward is the indoctrination of our youth in education establishments of all levels, but particularly in the universities and colleges. And I asked Greg Murphy about this. Was there anything that he would say that we could do to correct that? And he said, no. I don't know enough about how government operates to know, what authorities we have, but we've got to do something to correct the misinformation that our students are being given. Why parents continue to pay these huge sums of money for tuition for their children to be indoctrinated in this way is beyond me.
So John, again, I'm 56 years old. When I was an undergrad at UNC and subsequently in law school at UNC, the leftist professors predominated. That is the difference between now and then is they not only predominate, they are the exclusively permitted way of thinking, and those few brave students who aren't brainwashed or indoctrinated in total are intimidated and attacked and made to feel unwelcome on their own campuses. There are not many. So it's worse. In the law school, they took the law from just being sort of liberal about constitutional law, and they started building in sort of an anti-nuclear family, anti-American activism into every field of law, family law. It's amazing what they've done, and it's a grave threat to the country. I disagree with Greg in the sense that I'm not prepared to chalk it up as a lost war that you can never prevail in. In my view, I think you probably need to focus on two things, or we need to focus on two things, and somebody will make this their mainstay of their leadership at some point in time, and maybe we'll see some progress. But I think there are a couple of things to think about that are the key. One is money. You just said it. Education is subsidized by an endless flow of federal and state and local government money. The University of North Carolina 16 campus system. I know we got private colleges, but colleges across the board, public and private, that benefit from Pell Grants and student loan programs that are paid for by federal dollars, and that money goes into an unaccountable system, and professors and their tenure. It is a rotten system. We can do things about that, though. That money can be cut off if need be. And so, you form the consensus about how you go about that in the right way at the right time, and you pick up an historical moment and go do it. That's one thing. I think the other thing that you made reference to, you say parents pay these ungodly sums, even though they see what's happening to their children before their eyes. We are on, there's this, it's a cultural question, a question of what's acceptable and traditional. There's been a long time, there's been a consensus in the United States that people would want to seek a a bachelor's degree from a 4-year accredited college, but there are a lot of other paths, and the more I think education or academia defeats itself. The more gender studies graduates you send out who don't have a path because they haven't learned how to do anything, or even they haven't even gotten a good core liberal arts education that would give them perspective on accurate understanding of world history. They find themselves, some of the people who are out in these streets in these wars, or people who've been radicalized on campuses, and they don't have any useful employment path, and they're dissatisfied and unhappy. But you have other paths that are opening up, and I think there's more and more parents will be well served to see kids go get a couple of years in a community college and get an associate's degree, and either go to work and learn and find that they can have they're capable of building for themselves a lifestyle that's quite comfortable, or if they can transfer into the system at that point in time, but they've avoided a lot of the cost, and in the process of avoiding some of that cost, they've stripped some power out of those universities where they sort of incubate the radicals. And so I will say that's not an entirely adequate answer. As I was in the general, 3 times elected in the General Assembly, didn't serve out my 3rd term because this interrupted this going to Congress. But one of the most frustrating things, we made appointments to the Board of Governors of the university system there, and they kind of meet their match in the university system, not really be able to move things or change things very much, and we'd appoint some more that are a little tougher, and so far we've not seen the kind of change that we need. But that doesn't mean it can't be done, and there's nothing, and that is, to me, that's the whole American idea, is this system, this government, because of the ideas that are behind it, it is capable of self-correcting indefinitely. So you take all those things, all those nations before, the Roman Empire and the United Kingdom and all these countries that have withered or fallen on the ash heap of history. The idea behind America is what's unique about it, and it is absolutely. I mean, the people. Let's let's go ahead and, in fact, let's embrace the point that when we ratified the United States Constitution, it was internally contradictory, and to have people regarded as 3/5 of humans, they were owned by other people.
Yeah.
And that was fundamentally at odds with the underlying idea. So it has been a self-correcting process. We did fight a war in part over that, and hopefully resolved a lot of issues permanently that way. But lesser nations based on less of a genius underlying foundation, would have just been eliminated at that point. It would have fractured into multiple warring bodies on this continent, just as it existed in Europe. But it didn't happen because of that genius underlying that document. And so the problems that confront us today, troubling as they are, I view as more of an opportunity. If you go back to 1972, when the Democrats went their last lunatic phase, the people said, no way. And it began sort of the climb. It wasn't a straight path, but it began the climb that reached its pinnacle, I think, in Reagan, and ultimately in Congress. It took some time further before that really manifested itself in 1994, and meaningful change occurred. I think we can do that again. I think the president has started that process by serving through a fractious first term. And I think the American people need to come forward and they need to speak with a clear voice, because if they don't, I do think the problems we see today will pale in comparison to what we see in 3 or 4 years. You won't recognize the country.
How do you feel about the John Durham report and what the result of that is going to be? James Comey was just penned, I'm not a target of this, and he was pretty critical of, investigating the investigators as a general principle and everything. But this was an absolute clear and obvious attempt of an inside the castle coup that they attempted to foist on America.
It is the climax of the deep state. It's really serious, and it went to the Oval Office in terms of how the President Obama oversaw the effort to essentially to use the intelligence community and law enforcement to destroy the Trump candidacy and then destroy the Trump presidency in its crib. That is what happened. I would love to tell you that I'm cautiously optimistic about John Durham. I wouldn't quite put it that way. I would say that there are a lot of pieces to it. I personally am not going to support extensions of what they call FISA authority until we are able to see to it that we can hold people accountable for abuses. I'm not sure that's going to happen. I do think the emergence of a report that gives a deep explanation of what happened by Durham itself will have considerable value over time. I'm not satisfied with that, but I think that I do have a relatively strong confidence that will occur, that will be a good product. I think that Bill Barr is a courageous hero himself. I think it is a complicated task to clean up an institution like the FBI, and I think a lot of people who have just gotten to the point they want to see some, they want to have some scalps. They want to see Comey and Brennan, perp walked like Roger Stone was, and they want to see some retaliation or retribution for. My guess is that yearn is going to be disappointed. I just wouldn't guess. That's a guess. I hope not. I'd still like to see it, but I don't. That seems something that dramatic seems implausible to me. But I do believe that what they've engaged in may well yet be thoroughly discredited. And I mean, let me give you an example of what I mean. The appearance of Horowitz's report on the FISA abuses.
17 major screw-ups.
It goes beyond. Major screw-up is a fine way to say it, but except they were abuses. They were not just sort of. The media likes to characterize it as errors. It's not error. It's malignancy.
Exactly.
And so malign intent was involved, and they did horrendous things, abuses of rights. But one thing that's frustrating is like a report like that appears, and then the media picks out the thing where he whatever he characterized in terms of whether there was or was not political bias in it, which really he didn't say as much as was said about it. But, some people fixate on that, and they go, "Oh, this is going to be denied by the media," and they're just solid. But over time, the appearance of something like that by a credible source, it begins to gain its place.
It starts to take on a life of its own.
I think that's right. And I believe that what we're going to see at a minimum is that John Durham's going to appear with a well-constructed, thoroughgoing explanation for everything that was done. And I think Jim Comey might not be indicted, but he is going to be discredited. And I think Brennan is going to be discredited. And perhaps there will be a high-level indictment along the way. There needs to be, but I can live with a good work product that will assume the significance that I anticipate, even if it takes time to do it, and even if it's the subject of political controversy over an ensuing decade. It will come to be understood, at least in retrospect, as close as our country has ever come to a successful coup. there was a movie in the '60s. I think it's called 7 Days in September or something like
That's
that.
correct.
And I watched that movie. I'd always heard about it, and I watched it 2 years ago. I think I watched it, and it was frankly pretty boring. It was interesting how movies at that time they move sort of slow, but it was there was an interest, a cultural interest for movie making purposes in the prospect that the American military would conduct a coup against the president and how that would look. And I don't think that's particularly likely. That's not the way it would work in America. The way it would work is what they did here. They'd pervert the intelligence services and the law enforcement counter-espionage powers, and that's the path that it would go. We'll see. I may be overstating it, but there's ample indication, if you're conversant with all the details, there's ample indication that there was a nearly successful coup against the people of the United States, and the reckoning has not yet fully come to pass for that.
Last question, and maybe this is outside of not within the realm of what's part of the federal responsibility, but when going back to education, a lot of students believe that the path forward for success in life goes through a college or a university, and they're really not. They really don't have the aptitude for it, but they go in, they put the money in, that funnels through to the establishment. And, when Yale's got this huge, Harvard's got this huge endowment, it's obvious that, that to me, that, education is just a means to a financial end for them. When we were talking about community colleges, I know of the College of the Albemarle in Elizabeth City has a man working there that came from private industry, and his skill was welding. Mm-hmm. And they have run a lot of people through his school, taking a lot of minority kids who didn't have the aptitude to go to college, and he's taught them a trade and because he had contacts at the Norfolk shipyard and various other places, he was able to funnel his best students to open jobs that gave these young men an opportunity to earn an income that was far and away better than anything that they would be able to do on their own, and they had a real skill that was marketable.
Absolutely.
Is there anything that the federal government can do to stimulate this? And one more part about that. I used to live in a part of Elizabeth City known as Pelican Point, and there was a guy across the street from me that was the director of training for Ford Corporate. And so we were talking about this, and he wanted to talk to a political person to see if there was anything that could be done. Well, then I put him in touch with Bob Steinberg, and they had a nice meeting and everything like that. But Bob Steinberg was real high on that this, the man of this caliber could set up a system where you could kids could go in and get their training, and they could work them out with people that were doing some on the job skills that would further their learning ability, and between the on the job and the classroom time, that they could make a real difference in the lives of underprivileged children. But then as soon as Bob went to the establishment, he got shot right down. That's what we do, they say. Well, where is it? Can you tell me where it is? Well, they finally hired this fellow to do this welding course, and he's been very successful at it. But there's a lot of other things that we don't have a vocational educational system in this state, and I'm sure that there are other states that are just like that. Is that something that the federal government can get involved in to facilitate that kind of thing?
I think so, John. I think that you are, and to a degree, you're harkening back to something else we were talking about what do you do to sort of, how do you deal with this academia? Are we stuck with the liberal or even Marxist or anarchist or anti-American academic establishment? And I think what you're talking about is the solution. I think there's a silver lining in every dark cloud. One thing about this coronavirus pandemic is that I've got a 20-year-old who's a student at NC State. He's right now greatly frustrated. They're back up there, but he's doing his classes online, and they're talking about whether they're shutting dorms. There's a great need for young people to be out of the parents' house, and in the old days, you got out at 18 or something like that, and you're on your own and find your way. And maybe there were some good things about that era. Certainly, you understand why people would gravitate to education. It's a novel. I mean, it's a noble and appropriate, and I think a good idea to educate yourself. But it's easy for education being an intangible thing to kind of get off track and to be captured, and that's what we're seeing happen. I think the way this, I've actually searched my mind to figure out how I could suggest an idea to him in this coronavirus situation. Is there some other thing he could do to enrich his life and move in the direction he needs to go? Even though he's a very talented student, he's doing well scholastically, but is there some other path, something different? And we haven't really hit upon it. He's up there, but we're both dissatisfied with that, and I think that is being repeated tens of thousands of households across this state and millions across the country.
Absolutely.
And so, and I think it goes farther. And I think you said there's not really a vocational education. The community colleges in the state do some really interesting things, and they do it cheaply. And that's the place where people can get skills, and they actually wed themselves in a lot of ways. They serve industries that are there that have a need, and those industries can communicate exactly what they need workers to be able to do, and they can get those skills. And as I said, people can go on, and now they've sort of adapted their approaches so that people can go on to a full college degree from there and have credit toward that degree. So as new pathways emerge, people will find their way to that. And I think the other piece of it, Ted Cruz talks about the civil rights issue of the 21st century, school choice. It is a wedge issue that will strip voters away from the Democratic Party. They are lock, stock, and barrel controlled and owned by the establishment, education establishment, both in grade school and in colleges, and they are vulnerable on that because those things are not serving people well. And as far as Democrats are concerned, every policy question is about how to serve those establishments better, how to get more money and how to get them to suck up yet more resources, even as they get worse and worse in terms of meeting their mission imperatives. Empower parents at all levels to do what they need to do. Make it cheaper for them, and so I think the federal government does have pathways to do that. Ironically, it's probably less expensive than what we otherwise are stuck with, than these massive institutions with their massive endowments. and their extraordinary arrogance. They're a massive giant waiting to fall, and we need David to step up and put the stone right in Goliath's forehead, and I think openness to it, recognizing the opportunities that exist. And I've mentioned community colleges in North Carolina. You have one, I take Richmond County Community College. Dale McGinnis runs that. He's the president down there, and they've got one of the preeminent electrical lineman's instruction area down there. That is, it's a unique program. Believe it or not, usually the utilities train their own. These guys are being trained in a way that they're sort of cutting edge. They understand. They're teaching them smart grid kind of electrical service management. It's just one example, but innovative, creative approaches by people that are really on shoestring budgets, but they're making great headway with it. Just small changes. So you could take Pell Grants, for example, a big federal program, and you could expand the ability to use those into those community college programs. Save money in the doing of it. Draw some strength and energy from the big bureaucracy at the big higher level education, and give people another opportunity that actually enriches their lives and tamps down the power of that liberal academic community. I think there are innumerable things like that, and it's something we're going to have to work on over a period of years. It's not going to be solved in an instant, but it's a big issue in our society, and has grown up over many, many years, and it can be solved. And the bigger they are, the harder they fall. I think that when you get something it's like the Catholic Church in the days of the Protestant Reformation. You build up something and it seems so mammoth and so all-consuming, so powerful that you can't see how it can be undone. But right in the midst of its corruption lies the key to a path out of it. And I think it's a problem that can be corrected, but not by underestimating it.
With the coming out of COVID and a lot of need for employment at all levels, there, to suggest that something like that welding school could really benefit young Americans, particularly that come from disadvantaged backgrounds, would be a tremendous opportunity to take them from elevate their lives.
Absolutely, and we learn one of the things you learned in the financial programs that about business curriculum is the time value of money. The sooner in your life that you're able to begin earning, put you in better. In a spot where you can retire at a standard of living that'll work if you save and do that. It also makes less likely to occur the notions you get things out of order. The key, what they call this, I guess they call the sequence of success is what I've heard it's called, which is the need to get an education and get full-time employment. Be stable, have a stable earnings source before you get married, and do all of that before you have children, and it's almost an infinitesimal chance then that you will be impoverished. If you get that order wrong, there's a very good chance that you will be. It is, and so that's right. I mean, I think it's a stigma issue. And it is, and some there's a little escapism in it. I mean, there are folks who consider it imperative that everybody get a 4-year bachelor's degree from an institution of higher learning. It really, there are many people that does not serve well. And even for those who are quite capable of doing it intellectually, and there are a lot of people that fall into that category, there still is some critical thinking that is needed in terms of what will advance your life. getting bogged down in a multicultural grievance sort of focused notion. I mean, the notion that constitutes higher learning is a weak sort of concept on its own. But they can put anything out there and call it academic. But I mean, it's nothing more than examining one's navel when you get down to it, whether you're talking about racial grievance or trying to reinvent the age-old science, established ideas of sex and gender, or anti-Western civilization, sort of a fixation on colonialism, or any of these. All these things have something in common. They are designed to foment and build up human resentment, emotional thinking. And it doesn't. I mean, that's it's sort of like the what I said about these sterling ideas that underlie the country. They are in turn the product of Enlightenment thinking, right? Which is a preeminence of the authority of God, mixed with high regard for man's capacity to reason, and all the things that produce that were good. To the extent we lose we diminish reason, and we give way in so many different examples to to nursing grievance and hatred and envy and resentment. It's not a path to success. And that's what, if you want to pick your issue on the left in the Democratic Party, their entire facade is erected around resenting someone else.
Oh yes, absolutely. And you see it every day.
And it's hugely destructive of the human spirit. It's attractive. I mean, it tends to attract people.
Sure it does.
You indulge in that, you can whip yourself into a frenzy of anger and resentment over victimhood and why I haven't had a fair path, and you've had something better, or you've got some material thing that I would like to have, or there's nothing. Everybody is a great fan these days of the idea of don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the guy behind the tree. There's always, Bernie Sanders, how many times has he talked about billionaires, and as if there's just this unlimited litter of them, we could just take their money and then you wouldn't need to do anything for your life. But it's nothing more than resentment politics, and it feeds on the worst of human emotion, and it destroys reason. And that's what they're about. But I think the president's showing a different way, a positive way this week, and I think we're on path to have a decisive response by the silent majority. We'll see. You may come back and say I was wrong, but that's how I see it going right now.
This was a very, very interesting conversation.
Thank you, John.
Far and away in more depth than just about any other one that I've conducted. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
it was
sir.
A pleasure to see you.
My pleasure to see you. Thank you for coming all this way.
In 2020, we're going to have the most important election of a generation, and the John Woodard Show will be there to tell the story. The John Woodard Show features a longtime journalist and conservative commentator, John Woodard. John's relaxing interviewing style is sweeping the newsmaker community. If you're interested in sponsoring John's show, you should reach out to sales@johnwoodard.website. That's sales@johnwoodard.website. Reach the thousands of people downloading and listening to the show every week. Be part of the newest conservative show in North Carolina. Visit johnwoodard.website.